to stop annexation. This is part of an Arise online festival. We would, of course, normally been doing it in person, but COVID had other ideas. It's the online festival of Labour's left ideas. And this session is co-hosted by Arise and Labour and Palestine. I'm Christine Blower. I'm chairing today. I'm a Labour member of the House of Lords, and I'm delighted to welcome you to be part of this meeting. We, of course, here are going through the COVID crisis, as they are absolutely everywhere around the world, including, of course, in Palestine. But it's really important that at this time we still continue to focus on international solidarity, and Arise is a celebration of our values of internationalism, solidarity and unity. And we're all very pleased to be part of it. The issue of standing with Palestine against Israel's illegal annexation plans couldn't be more important. With the new government in Israel threatening further annexation of occupied Palestinian land and specifically threatening to annex large swathes of the West Bank, including the Jordan Valley, starting in July, now is the time for us to be having this meeting and getting everybody active on this issue. This is the time for Labour and for the UK government to be vocal, to be vociferous and to be proactive in seeking to stop this from happening. Due to the significant level of interest, so as well as this Zoom webinar, we are streaming live from the Arise YouTube page and across various other Facebook pages. And as the event goes on, there may be the opportunity for questions, but we've got such good speakers. I think we'll probably take most of our time listening to them. So our speakers, whom you can see on the screen, are Hugh Lanning from Labour and Palestine, very long-standing Palestinian activist on Palestine. Samia Agotme, lecturer at Birzeit University, who's joining us live from Palestine. She is a lecturer and trade union activist. Philippa Harvey, who was an NUT member of last year's Women's TUC delegation to Palestine, but has been on many delegations to the region. I think I was on one with you, Philippa, too. Adrian Weir, who is the London from the London Regional Policy Forum and Unite Assistant General Secretary. And later we will also hear from His Excellency the Ambassador Hussam Zumlot, and finally we'll close with Jeremy Corbyn. So without any more remarks from me, I'm going to give the floor to Hugh Lanning, who will open proceedings. Hugh, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you for chairing today, and thank you for everyone switching on a Saturday afternoon at this critical time for Palestine. And just welcome on behalf of Labour and Palestine. We've got a great panel today with some really good Palestinian voices who are much better placed than me to comment on what's going on and what needs to be done. So I'll focus more on what Labour and Palestine is trying to do and what we should be doing within the Labour Party. But also a special thanks to Jeremy for joining us later today. It's great to have him back on our platforms and speaking up on Palestine, although it's a shame there's a need for him to carry on doing it. Secondly, just a little about Labour and Palestine, who are working with the Rise to run this session. Labour and Palestine is sponsored by 7 major trade unions affiliated to the Labour Party. It's not a membership organisation, it's just a social media platform with just one purpose, that of building grassroots support for Palestine within the Labour Party. It is based on the belief that there is overwhelming support for Palestine within party membership, but the voice of Palestine isn't seen, heard or organised well enough to be properly reflected in the party's policies and actions. And our methodology is a simple one. It's to talk about Palestine and to give space to Palestinian voices. And with the help and support of many others, pro-Palestine motions were passed at the last 2 party conferences, with much waving of Palestinian flags as they went through. So on paper, Labour now has the most progressive policy on Palestine it has ever had, although admittedly that's not a very high bar for it to get over in many years. The statement on annexation, which we published and launched along with others, has now been signed just on the Labour and Palestine site alone by over 9,000 Labour Party members. But to what end? What are we trying to do? The threat, as has already been said, of annexation is going to be critical. It's really the litmus test of whether on Palestine, Labour is going to be part of the solution or part of the problem. It's said often by many that Palestine is a complicated issue, but it isn't. There's an oppressor, Israel, which maintains an illegal occupation, the siege of Gaza, builds illegal walls and settlements. It breaks international law, discriminates and decimates Palestinian rights. Most importantly, it denies the Palestinian right to self-determination. So although annexation sounds like an anodyne and administrative action, actually annexation is the forcible and unilateral acquisition by one state, in this case Israel, over territory which has no recognised sovereignty and seeks to make it part of the state. One of the positive advantages there's been of COVID and the lockdown has been spreading my reading a bit more widely. And I was reading an article about how the native nations in the US tried to survive the onslaught on them. And within it, there was an excellent description of settler colonialism, a simple one about settler colonialism. It said, in colonialism, the colonizer says to the colonized, you work for me. In contrast, in settler colonialism, the colonizer says, you go away. And rather than being conscripted to exploit local resources, the resident natives are removed to make room for incoming settlers. And that is precisely what we're seeing taking place in Israel and Palestine. So it's hardly surprising, therefore, to see Trump and the United States egging on and supporting Israel's planned annexation through Trump's fake but dangerous plan that we should not lose sight of. It is, after all, a strategy on which their country was built, of annexation and driving away the native population. So given that annexation is such a heinous crime, how should the international community react? Well, we have a recent example, the Crimea. Within months of Russia's annexation of the Crimea, the EU in particular had in place a whole plethora of what it described as restrictive measures, what we would call sanctions. They were based, and this is critical, on the fundamental principle that there should be no recognition of the act of annexation. Either directly, indirectly, tacitly or covertly, states should do nothing that accepts or tolerates the illegal act of annexation. And that's a key core principle that we should be ensuring that Labour adopts. And we in the UK and the Labour Party and the rest of the world were not that good when East Jerusalem was annexed in 1980. And we must ensure that we learn the lessons this time and that we will not stand idly by once again. Because I think we need to be clear, this is just not a small step. However big or small the actual geographical territory of the annexation that is announced by Israel in the first instance, this is an annexation, is Israel saying it wants permanent control of all of the land from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, and that in its vision, there is never, ever going to be room or space for an independent, viable Palestinian state. And I think we need to be clear that that is the point and the purpose of annexation. So therefore, coming back to Labour, if annexation takes place next month, which in some form we think is still the likely case, however it is framed, the Labour Party must not only be on the side of the oppressed, but it must be saying and advocating that there must be consequences for the oppressor's actions. In the anti-apartheid struggle, one of the key demands was sanctions now. If Israel goes ahead with its plans, governments and states must act. This can and should take many forms: economic restrictions, ending the arms trade, diplomatic, cultural and political. There are many actions that can and should be taken. Israel will be creating a regime based on racial discrimination. Annexation is not a neutral act. Israel wants the land, the resources, but not the people, nor the financial obligations that should go with being the occupier. It is quite happy for us in the international community community to continue to foot the bill for its illegal actions. If it means nothing else, it must mean that the Oslo process is officially dead and cremated, gone up in the flames of its naked settler colonialism. Our challenge, therefore, is to ensure that Labour is on the right side of history. On the 4th of July, there is a national day of action to try and ensure that annexation doesn't go ahead. Look on our site and the PSC site to see how you can join in with that action. We're going to be pushing for a parliamentary debate before the recess in which we would hope Labour will be supporting the call for sanctions. Personally, I don't care if they're called restrictive measures. What I do care is that Labour should support action being taken, that it should be supporting sanctions now. Thank you very much.
Hugh, thank you very much. And as you say, a situation often described as complex, exposed brilliantly in your presentation there as starkly a very, very simple one, and a situation in which we must stand with the Palestinians. And now we have the opportunity to hear directly a voice from Palestine. As I said in the introduction, Samia Al-Botme is a lecturer and trade union activist at Birzeit University. We're very pleased to have you with us, Samia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Christine. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for hosting me on this webinar. Indeed, it's very critical times we're going through, and much of the issue goes around also the vagueness with which Israel is approaching this situation. There has been news that nearly 33% of the West Bank territory will be annexed. And this will directly affect the lives of nearly 120,000 Palestinians, which covers the area of 75 villages. I will, in my brief talk, try to illustrate how the annexation will impact the lives of the Palestinians. And in a way, this is for us as the natives living on the land, is just, as Hugh has mentioned, it's just another step on the long road of Israel's colonialism of Palestine. There has been the colonization of 1948 Palestine, 67, annexation of Jerusalem, and now the intended annexation of another part of the West Bank. So it is important to keep in mind that Israel's settler colonial scheme is continuing, and it is really up to us as Palestinians to resist this colonialism in solidarity and in cooperation with conscientious individuals and institutions like yourself around the world. The annexation of territories within the West Bank is going to be devastating for our lives. Israel's famous and intricate system of movement restrictions will be intensified. We do have apartheid roads on the West Bank. I mean, the area of the West Bank is quite small, so we have 700 miles of these apartheid roads. And these apartheid roads are roads that actually go through Palestinian territory, but we are not allowed as Palestinians to use these roads. These roads are exclusively reserved for Israelis, although they actually go through our villages, our towns, our territory. This annexation will allow Israel to intensify and broaden and increase these apartheid roads. It will give it basically a free hand to do that. Roadblocks are, we have more than 500 roadblocks within the West Bank. These break down the West Bank, divide the West Bank into three main territories, three main areas. Within these three main areas, we have numerous numbers of checkpoints. These checkpoints basically prolong your travel time. The distance between Ramallah and Bethlehem is using bypass roads and so on is 1.5 hours. Normally it should be 40 minutes, but because we are not allowed to enter Jerusalem, we use roads that go further east then south, and it takes us 1.5 hours. Now, this 1.5 hours actually depends on the mood of the soldiers at the main checkpoint roadblock between Ramallah and Bethlehem. It could be, the travel time could be 1.5 hours, but also it could be 3, it could be 7, it could be 10. So having these roadblocks and increasing Israel's capacity to set these roadblocks through annexation will basically devastate our lives and end up containing Palestinians' capacity to move and conduct their everyday activities. If annexation actually takes place in the Jordan Valley, our only exit to the rest of the world is through Jericho, which is located in the Jordan Valley. Having Israel confiscate the area around Jericho, this means we will require special permits to reach Jericho in order to leave to the rest of the world. At the moment, we are not allowed as Palestinians to use sea or air transport facilities. This is our only way to remain connected with the rest of the world. The annexation of the Jordan Valley, in which Jericho is located, will jeopardize our capacity to exit and enter into Palestine. There is also further issues having to do with Israel's very racist and very colonial rules. Israel has this law which is called the absentee property rights law. It stipulated in 1950. And this law basically notes that if the person who owns a property, land, whatever asset it is not present, the state has the right to confiscate that property. Now, with annexation, this is going to whatever land a person is not present on it is going to be confiscated, easily confiscated by Israel. Palestinian refugees who still own land in the West Bank, but live in Jordan or in Europe or anywhere in the world, will also lose their land to Israel through confiscation, through using this law. And Israel has used this law extensively since 1950. A lot of Palestinian land and property has been confiscated through using this measure. Even without, Israel doesn't need this annexation to build more settlements and confiscate more land, but this annexation will allow Israel to have a free hand in the West Bank. It will annex and it will confiscate land and it will demolish houses and it will set up checkpoints much easier than it does now. Because now the West Bank is defined as an occupied territory. If Israel annexes these parts of the West Bank, it does not become, in the eyes of Israel, an occupied territory. Hence, it has the rights that it sees to apply within this territory are more free and hence more devastating to us as Palestinians. At the moment, there are few pockets along the apartheid wall where Palestinian communities can enter into their villages and communities only if they have a permit. So no one outside these communities can enter unless you get a special permit, which is very difficult to get. So these communities are basically confined in their own territories. This is one model of the lives of Palestinians who are going to be under annexation. No one can actually enter their territory, and it will be very difficult for them to even bring in goods and services into their territories. So in short, and according to international law, an occupying power is not allowed by international law. International law prohibits an occupying power to annex any territory. So this annexation is in blatant violation of international law. Israel is changing the status of an occupying land. And this basically violates international law in its simplest and most complicated form. The fact that Israel is annexing these parts of the West Bank, especially the Jordan Valley. The Jordan Valley is the food basket of the West Bank. This means that Israel is depriving us, not just of our property, it's depriving us of our capacity to survive on the very basic level of food provision for the West Bank population. So at every level, this annexation is life-threatening. It's life-threatening for us as individuals, for our livelihoods, for our land, for our future. Because once this land is annexed, it's very difficult to unannex it. Hence, it is extremely important to act. It is extremely important to, for all of us to stand together against this annexation. And it's very important to frame this annexation in its rightful terms, in the sense that this is part and parcel of Israel's settler colonial process, apartheid, racist measures. And this is why it is important for us to all oppose it, to apply pressure on Israel through BDS, through sanctions, through economic boycotts, through violating or stopping agreements with economic agreements with Israel. Over the years, Israel has managed to get away with its colonial policies, and it's enough. Enough is enough. It's for us as Palestinians, this colonial project by Israel cannot carry on. And for that, we ask for your solidarity. We ask for your pressure on your governments to stand in solidarity with us, to pressure the Israeli government through sanctions, through different measures. The measures that the Belgian parliament yesterday initiated through motions to apply actually sanctions on Israel is a model to go by. And we hope Europe in general, North America, Latin America, East Asia, would all from everyone around the world would actually stand with us in these critical times. And thank you very much for hosting me on this platform. Thank you.
Samia, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for that presentation. Those of us who've had the privilege of visiting Palestine will know that the current constraints on Palestinian lives are already utterly unacceptable, but this illegal proposed act of annexation must be described as such and must be called out by all people of good positions. And I would just say that you've just heard directly there the voice from Palestine calling for us to work on BDS, which is sometimes thought of as contentious, but clearly, if we're going to be in solidarity with our friends in Palestine, this is the place we need to be. So thank you very much, Samia. Our next speaker is Philippa Harvey. She's an NUT member. She was an NUT member of the delegation to the TUC Women's Delegation to Palestine, and has been a member of multiple NEU, NUT, and then NEU delegations to Palestine. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you, Philippa. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the last delegation that I went on, which was actually a delegation of women from across many different unions. It was a delegation that came out of the TUC Women's Conference, and there were 16 women from 11 different unions. And our aim from that delegation was to meet women and different women's organisations whilst we were on our delegation. I want to pick out a couple of the different groups of women that we met and talk about what we learned from those women and the challenges that they face, but also the lessons that we learned from them and the way that they fight back against the occupation and the resistance that they use in their daily life, and also the lessons that we learned from them. So the first group of women that I want to talk about is a group of teachers that we met in Hebron from the General Union of Palestinian Teachers. They talk about how they use education as a weapon against occupation. They've educated themselves to become teachers, so they've gone through school, but they've also then gone through university and become teachers. They do that to participate fully in resisting the occupation. And then they use education to become teachers to then educate the next generation so that they can fully participate in life, but also in resisting the occupation. They talked about how it's not easy for them as women, being Palestinian women, because they are on duty 24 hours a day. First they teach, they go to work and teach, and then they go home for their second shift of the day, because for the majority of them, they take on, because they take on the majority of the domestic and care work as well. And then they also are sort of alert for most of the night, because they are often in many situations aware of night raids and other things that go on during the night as well. So they're just on duty all the time. And they talk to us about how in heightened times of tensions, this will increase as well. So they talk to us about how this is their life, this is what they do. And they also talk to us about how the whole issue around access and accessing their work and accessing education is so important. Now, Samia's just talked to you about the whole issue of freedom of movement under annexation. But for women, there are additional issues around movement, because they talk to us around how going through checkpoints brings additional humiliations for women sometimes. And they talked about how they have their personal property emptied out, and how that for them is difficult with their personal items spread out in front of them and everybody else and the people who run the checkpoints, and how they find that very difficult. They also talked about how for them, they have to get back by certain times because they have the responsibility of childcare and all of those sort of things. And because of Samia talking to you about how long journeys are and how they are so unpredictable, for them, that means they have difficulty with travel. So that was something that they talked to us about, but they remain in education, seeing their route in education and using the importance of that. The second group of women I want to talk to you about are a group of women who are part of a health committee. Now, health provision, particularly in the rural areas, they talked to us about. They talked about how it was inadequate, not because of the inadequacy of funding and resources, because there's a tax system that does not allow the PA is not necessarily in charge. It's not in charge of the taxes because it has this route of tax system, which I won't talk about because that would take all the time I have. And with annexation, again, as Samia was saying, there will be further erosions on the finances because of the Jordan Valley and the issues around that. But they talked about how they'd seen this gap in the health system, particularly in the rural, outlying rural areas. So they had set up mobile health clinics. They'd done that themselves, and they'd staffed them with women health practitioners, women doctors and women nurses. And they had dealing particularly with concentrating on reproductive health, women's health issues to do prevention rather than dealing with the longer term issues of health, so that they were doing prevention around those issues, that particularly around women's health issues. And it's had a real impact. But again, this involves the movement of people. And again, you can see how annexation is going to have an issue to do with that after having listened to what Samir has been saying. This health committee has also done work around what providing for the elderly in the community by setting up a sort of welfare state type initiatives, providing clubs for the elderly where they play chess, they have music, and it's been so successful in one community that the ministry has asked them to replicate it so that they can, for support, so that they can replicate it in other communities. And this is showing when women get organised and they see a gap, they can do something about it. And they were a really impressive group of women that we met. Finally, I wanted to talk about a group of women workers, the kindergarten teachers that we met, who have campaigned for a minimum wage, and they've won that right to a minimum wage. And it's had an impact for workers right through Palestine. Now, that was really interesting, but it was about sort of employment law. And we met with these women, and whilst they've won the minimum wage, it's actually had an impact across all sectors of employment, and not necessarily just benefiting women, but benefiting all the employees, probably at this stage more men than women. But I wanted to talk about employment really, because when there are times of crisis, as in the COVID crisis, when there are times of heightened tension, whenever they're in times of crisis, when employment becomes more insecure, and women always lose out at that time. And this is the case also in Palestine. And so women are less likely to be able to get work, travel to work, and do all those sorts of things that you need to when you're seeking work. And they talk to us about those issues. And it is heightened for women in those situations. They can't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go and queue up to go through the checkpoints in the way that the men can. And they were the issues that they were talking to us about. So crisis, conflict, are much worse issues for women. The delegation was a really successful delegation for us going as trade unionists from here to meet with those women. It's the first all-women delegation that's gone organised as a result of a TUC motion through a TUC conference. It's brought together this group of TUC women here, TUC affiliated women here. And it's something that we are now organising as TUC women here to support the campaigns that we would need to here. And I think it was a successful delegation, and we are working to campaign around the issues now around annexation. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and thank you for including me in this panel. Thank you very much.
Philippa, thank you very much, and thank you very much for highlighting the centrality of health and the kind of social care dimension too, as well as education. The resistance of women in Palestine is something truly impressive. And as Philippa says, we learn very much when we go and meet with Palestinian women. So thank you very much for being with us this afternoon and amplifying the voices of those things that Palestinian women would want to be heard said. Our next speaker is Adrian Weir from the London Region National Policy Forum and from Unite the Union, Assistant General Secretary. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Christine, and thanks to everybody who's joined the call this afternoon. As Christine said, my name's Adrian Weir, and I'm elected from Labour's London Regional Conference as a delegate to the National Policy Forum. And at the National Policy Forum, I've been allocated to the International Policy Commission, which is something that I'm very pleased to have been appointed to. It allows me to make an intervention in this important area of work. Over the past few years, clearly our party's position on Palestine has become much more sharply focused. It has brought into sharp relief the realities of the occupation, the wall, the checkpoints, and all the other iniquities of daily life for Palestinians in the occupied territories. And who among us can forget the amazing speech made by Colin Moynihan at conference in Liverpool in 2018, a speech made to a conference hall decked out with Palestinian flags. And of course, under Jeremy's leadership, our party made a pledge to, once in government, to recognise Palestine as an independent state. So you may feel that all these new policy developments are in some way in the bank, and that from this year onwards, we could seek to build on that new progressive approach. Well, I have to tell you that if you thought those policies were in the bank, then we've been robbed. We've been absolutely robbed, because this spring marked a new cycle of the National Policy Forum. 8 new policy documents covering different areas have been published for consultation with the party and amongst stakeholders. And in my view, all of these papers are remarkably thin. They say very little. There is little concrete, and with little or no reference to conference decisions or manifesto pledges. So really, it's policy development by omission, especially with no conference this year. And Christina, I'd just now like to turn particularly to the international paper, the one that I've been working on since the spring. And in the international paper, there is just a singular reference to Palestine, although not mentioned by name, and it reads as follows. It says, there has been a regression of international law and respect for human life, such as the planned annexation of the occupied West Bank. So the victim of this regression of international law, Palestine, is not mentioned by name. The perpetrator, Israel, is not mentioned by name. And the instigator, the United States, also not mentioned by name. Well, the one thing about the consultation is that members are given the opportunity to make their voices heard, and through our members, we can ensure that Palestinian voices are heard within our party. If you oppose the proposed annexation of much of the West Bank by Israel, then you have the opportunity to say so, but only until this coming Tuesday, the 30th of June. Members, either individually or as a CLP collective, should post on the National Policy Forum international pages their absolute and complete opposition to annexation. But more than that, we should be demanding as a policy that we stand for firm and positive action if, or more likely when, annexation takes place. And we know that other people on this call have spoken about sanctions or the code word, as Hugh referred to the other words used for sanctions. So how do we do this? How do we make our voices heard? Well, over this weekend or on Monday and Tuesday of next week, log on to the National Policy Forum website at the international page and make your submission. Often it is the weight of submissions that can determine what goes into the NPF final report. And you can also click to like other pro-Palestinian submissions that have been made prior to you joining the site. So it's really, really important to get on that site, to like pro-Palestinian posts and post your own submission on opposition to the annexation and calling for firm action if and when it does take place. I'll read out the website address, although I think it has been posted in chat. It's www.policyforum.labour.org.uk/commissions/international. So please make your voice heard, and through you make Palestinian voices heard by the close of consultation, which is this coming Tuesday. So thanks very much, Christine.
Thank you very much for that, Adrian. We're very pleased that you are a voice there in the National Policy Forum, saying, I'm sure, all the things that we would want to hear being said. I understand that there are 750 people at least on this call and participating. So a number of you probably have already made a submission to the National Policy Forum, but I bet a number of you haven't. So if you haven't, then maybe the remainder of you who haven't could follow Adrian's advice and make sure that you get those submissions in by Tuesday. If you didn't manage to write down the web address, it is available in the chat, so you can pick that up. And I'm delighted that we have 750 people who want to be on this call this afternoon. Our next speaker, whom you can see on the screen, is His Excellency the Palestinian Ambassador, Hussam Zomlot, and we are extremely pleased to be joined by you this afternoon, Ambassador. The floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, Christina, and allow me really to say how grateful, delighted, inspired, and empowered to be among such friends and colleagues and brothers and sisters. We all may miss you, Christine, and of course, Hugh, our good friend. Having such an event has two major messages. The first is about the organization that is Arise, but Labour and Palestine, and I know Hugh Lanning has been for the last 2 years, and many of his colleagues really wanting to make sure that there is an organization that will always bring to the fore the issue of Palestine for one prime reason. The premise of Labour is justice, social justice primarily, and I think Palestine is an issue of justice first and foremost. It is an issue of political justice, legal justice, human justice, and social justice, and therefore we always find ourselves in perfect harmony with the true values of Labour. And second, it is about the timing of such an event, and you just announced, Christine, that there are 700. Those 700 leaders all over the UK, Labour leaders and movement, is a base that we need at this particular point in time. And in timing, I mean the impending annexation that the Israeli government, the latest formed government, has promised to do by as early as next week, the 1st of July. And I am so touched to be among such a panel, and just ending with listening to Adrian, but also you know, my good friend and colleague in Sawas here before that, and my fellow Palestinian Samia, and what she said in terms of the human cost of this, the real tangible cost of this. Philippa and her focus on the women's side, which, by the way, it's a huge arena. Palestinian women have been receiving the most of the cost of this occupation, most of it in every sphere, and it is important that we focus on this because it is them who have to provide for the family in the absence of the father. It is them who have to protect because the army would harm more than men. It is them who have to provide financially and otherwise. And I hear that our good friend Jeremy is going to join us later, and maybe I'll be with you or maybe not, but allow me to say that I sent a letter to Jeremy, and I told him when he stepped down as the leader of the party that he has crafted his place in the heart of the 13 million Palestinians, every one of us. And that is an eternal place for him, for how principled he was, principled not only about Palestine, but he has taught the world a lesson, that is Jeremy Corbyn, that values can never be subdivided. They must be applied right across the board, be it on Palestinians, be it on Black Americans, be it on anyone else, that our values are simply universal. Having said that, and back to the issue of annexation, Samia have really saved me a great deal of time to focus on the real issue of human cost. So let me focus on the political aspect. of this. And I have the following to share with you. Number one, it is clear for us that this whole thing is a calculation by Netanyahu, and for him it provides three main gains. The first is personal. It's personal gain. Simply it allows him to be re-elected, and he was. And this was the key sort of issue for his re-election campaign. It allowed him already to dodge criminal charges against him. The second gain is political, and this is very important because Israel has been doing this for a long time. The political gain is the diversion, i.e. the whole world and us now are discussing annexation, how to prevent it, how to stop it, when in fact we should be focusing on ending occupation. Everybody is up in arms about a grave illegality, a war crime, which is annexation, when in fact there are so many other war crimes that are being committed by Israel right now. And changing the goalpost is an Israeli practice we have been growing accustomed to. And you know what? Israel now expects reward should it at least postpone this. So it has grown accustomed, like the illegal settlement exercise, if you remember in the old days. So Israel has thankfully frozen some building expansion when in fact illegality should never ever be rewarded. So for Netanyahu, such distraction and diversion is very useful. He does not want to hear from such an important audience and gathering talk about ending occupation, implementing international resolutions, etc. He wants us all to beg for stopping already a war crime. The third is strategic. I mean, this government and this Netanyahu has been very clear. They want to end the discussion about the two-state solution. He believes that such a plan, annexing 30% or annexing the entire West Bank, and I think the plan is annexing the West Bank in its entirety, from the Far East to the 1967 borders, would actually deliver that final blow to any hope for a two-state solution. Having said that, let me explain our position now, our official political position. First, this annexation has two main sides, two main sort of manifestations. The first is the announcement itself, even before implementation. For us, the announcement that took place by the Israeli government, the newly formed government, which is, by the way, a wide range coalition of parties from the far right, the settler movement, through to Likud, all the way to Labour, Israeli Labour, announcing in the legal sense their intent to annex occupied territories means nulling all the agreements that they have signed with the PLO, with us. It means canceling all the understandings that we have built. It means a clear-cut announcement of their walking back of all that we have agreed about. And it does not make sense to us that we continue respecting, honoring these agreements. And that's why the immediate response you have had from the Palestinian leadership, the announcement by President Abbas, was quick. Next day of the announcement was on the 17th of May last month, is that we are absolved of all agreements signed. What are these agreements? With all the issues and the problems of Oslo, with all the disingenuous behavior of Israel throughout the last 27 years, the principle of Oslo is that the two sides will engage in an interim process that would lead to the implementation of international resolutions, UN Security Council resolutions. It's mentioned in the first sentence, namely UN Security Council Resolution 242 and 338. These resolutions call for the ending of Israel's occupation that began in 1967 and the establishment of a state of Palestine. That declaration of principle has seen the recognition of the PLO to the state of Israel on the 1967 borders. There was no reciprocation, regrettably, and this is a mistake we need to learn and assess later, of Palestine as a state, but of the PLO as a legitimate and sole representative of the Palestinian people. And then Oslo listed the five main final status issues: Jerusalem, refugees, borders, settlements, and the issue of the political prisoners and natural resources like water and what have you. By accepting in 1993 to discuss, negotiate these issues, and these issues must be negotiated on the basis of international law, then Israel has reversed its previous position and policy of annexing Jerusalem. And by accepting to put on the table all these final status issues based on international framework, Israel has accepted the international framework. And therefore, the agreements that were signed were clear, should take us in that direction. The Palestinian Authority was established to take us from occupation to independence. And the timeline for that transition was 5 years, from 1993 to 1999. Now, by announcing this, Israel has reversed the already reversed. So it's 180 degrees of going back on its agreements vis-a-vis Jerusalem, let alone the occupied West Bank and the rest of the occupied. It's a nulling, it's a total nulling of the agreements. And therefore, the decision you heard from us a couple of weeks ago is final, irreversible. This is not just a political decision, it is a legal decision. We can no longer respect or adhere to these agreements if the other side does not. It has taken us a long time, but we have gotten to the moment of the truth. The second part of annexation is implementation itself. Many people were telling us, why did you take a decision to absolve yourself and cancel all agreements early on? Because, as I explained, announcement in itself is a major political and legal act by the government of the occupying state. Second is the implementation. Here, it is crucial that we clarify very clearly that this salami slicing approach by Israel doesn't work. We are talking about the principle. Should Israel annex any part of the occupied West Bank, any part, 1 centimeter, and by the way, what they're talking about is annexing the entire West Bank. And this is in line corresponding to the Trump deal. If you go back to the Trump ultimate deal, it has nothing to do with deals or ultimates or peace. But if you go back to it, you will see a provision there that Israel shall have an I'm quoting, overall security control of the area from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. So the annexation is definitely the entire West Bank. When they talk about 30% that includes the Jordan Valley, it means what they really mean is the rest of the territory would be organized, arranged as a situation of Pantostans. And by the way, Netanyahu was on publicly saying this only a few weeks ago. He was asked what will happen to the Palestinian people living in these areas. He said they will continue being in their enclaves, i.e. Akka, Pantostans. Should implementation happens, for us that will mark the end of Israel's commitment to the two-state solution. Of course, Israel has never committed indeed to the two-state solution. Israel has ransacked the two-state solution. Israel has been building settlements for the last 27 years, i.e. since we signed the Oslo Accords. We know that. And many questions should have been asked. Why didn't we stop it before? There was no such a legal commitment and announcement and implementation to actually preempt any possibility of a two-state solution. We were maybe hoping against hope, maybe naive, doesn't matter now, doesn't matter, that all these illegal settlements will in the end be dismantled, like it happened in Sinai, before the occupied Sinai, like it happened in other places in Gaza. But with implementing annexation, then Israel would want to turn its temporary occupation as per our own signed agreements with it into a permanent occupation. This will mark Israel's abandonment of the two-state solution. And as such, for us, the choice would be one. We will have to go back to the pre-1993 situation. Israel must be responsible in every single sense of the word, responsible on the Palestinian people under its military occupation. It has to be responsible on the territory it occupies. International law must be applied, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention. And we want to go back to regroup, reorganize, reconnect with each other. I need to reconnect with Samia and rethink our case. We have so many points of strength other than the so-called political process and peace process. We are a vivid nation. Our nation has been surviving on our land, steadfast, growing. We have you and the international solidarity campaign movement. We have the international law, and we have the region and the Arab world. And we need to reassess where do we go next. However, the status quo cannot continue. Enough is enough. The status quo cannot continue. And one word about the Palestinian National Authority. This is a hard won for Palestinian people. It's because of our struggle. It is not a gift from Israel or anybody. We realize the functions of the Palestinian Authority. We are not interested to dissolve the Palestinian National Authority. However, the Palestinian National Authority is not an end in itself. It is just a tool, a mean to get to an end, and the end is liberation, the end is freedom, the end is independence, the end is the right of return to the Palestinian refugees. And if the choice is that Israel wants the Palestinian National Authority to improve livelihoods of the Palestinian people under occupation, that choice will not be given to us. So we are at a very existential moment, not for the Palestinian people. And I'm sorry to dwell on this. This is not an existential threat on us. Samia will continue teaching our students in Birzeit University. Our movement outside will continue, and maybe it will be strengthened. We are 6.7 million Palestinians now on our land. There are 6.5 million Israeli Jews there. Our people are absolutely clear in terms of their identity, national destination, heritage. By the way, there might be some disunity between political factions, but the unity of the people is solid. So we are not worried about our cause, our rights, our people to mobilize. We believe that this annexation is an existential threat on the internationally sponsored two-state solution. It's an existential threat on the international rules-based order, and it is an existential threat on any immediate possibilities for reaching a just and genuine peace. I will end with what can be done. We must prevent this annexation. We must prevent it. We should not think about what should happen if annexation happens, because I assure you, that's a new chapter, a new terrain, a new territory. We will have to think together as partners, Palestinians, our friends outside. Leave that bridge to be crossed when we get to it, but we must do everything in our power to prevent it. And here it's no mistake. We have had the UK government, their position is clear. The Prime Minister Johnson was on record in the Parliament 2 weeks ago saying that this is a breach of international law, and he and his government strongly object to it. We do commend this and appreciate this clarity by the Prime Minister. We also commend the speech by the Minister for Middle East, Mr. James Cleverly, only last week in the Security Council, saying that Britain will not recognize any annexation. These are illegal acts. So the position is clear. However, Israel has grown accustomed to positions and statements. This needs action. We need to change the calculus with Netanyahu and the Israeli government, and we need to give the Israeli public an informed decision. They need to be informed about the consequences now. We need to deliver a preemptive consequences, not after annexation, before annexation. What will happen? First is sanctions, and I don't want to explain how crucial it is, not for Palestinians, not for us only, for international legitimacy, the issue of sanctions. If you make Israel the exception, as you have been for all these years, then I think that the last ditch of hope and internationalism would be gone. We must never be the exception. Sanctions must be imposed as they have been on any country, any state that has illegally acquired territory by force. So annexation requires sanctions now, not after. Second, the issue of differentiation, and it's an already existing UK policy, but it has not been implemented to the full and to the core. We are in touch with many government agencies here, and we believe Israel is dodging this issue. Differentiation means that the products from the Israeli illegal settlements must be banned, must be differentiated. The British customers have a right to know. And while it's still not really meeting the legal responsibility of the UK and the international community, labeling does not meet the legal responsibility. It has to be banning. You ban illegal products. Yet even labeling is not being really implemented. We call on our friends and on the government, and we have been dealing with many departments to make sure that that policy is strictly implemented, and it isn't at this point in time. Lastly is the recognition of the state of Palestine. I mean, it's long overdue. It should have happened the moment the United Kingdom and the international community pressured us, the Palestinian people and leadership, in the 70s and the 80s to accept the two-state solution. And I'm sorry, Hugh and Christina, to dwell on this. The two-state solution was never a Palestinian demand. The two-state solution was an international demand, an international requirement. And we provided that concession because we thought aligning ourselves with international legitimacy, international law, international resolutions would actually provide a relative justice framework that can take us into a destination, a near destination of achieving relative justice. Nonetheless, we are where we are today, and the issue of recognizing the state of Palestine has been at least 30 years late. Should the United Kingdom, with its legacy and the Balfour Declaration that has contributed directly to the disposition and the ongoing suffering of our people, the Palestinian people, with its legacy of the mandate during which much of this has happened, and with the legacy that all this will end up in vulgar apartheid. What Netanyahu is proposing right now is vulgar apartheid. The UK has been a main benefactor and actually founder of the international system, the rules-based international order. What is at stake here for the United Kingdom is very high and serious, and therefore we believe that delaying recognition is going to be serving exactly the opposite agenda, and we think recognition is needed now. Maybe if this goes on and the annexation is implemented, I'm not so sure what do we need recognition. If you are not recognizing the two-state you espouse now, then you might be too late. I will end up with Labour here, and you know, I don't need to say that if the cross-party position is as clear as it is in the UK, that the Labour should be and must be and is more progressive, more advanced. We salute the 700 and the panel. We know the depth of support in the Labour movement and party all over. We have seen elected MPs and signing the letter of 149, calling for sanctions on Israel, which is a breakthrough and a very tangible, practical demand. We have also followed Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, and her letters to the Foreign Secretary and the activism there. We very much hope to hear from Keir very soon. He's the head of the opposition, the head of Labour, and he is a human rights lawyer. And this has to do with human rights. This has to do with international law. So we are hoping that Keir would make his position public in the nearest opportunity, and that this movement that is being created as we speak, not only in the UK, but by the way, we are inspired, touched, and let me say this rather ironically, Netanyahu has managed to also create such a movement that is building up to once and for all say enough is enough. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so very much for your presentation to us. It was indeed inspiring. It's brilliant that we can have these Zoom meetings, but it's very odd not to be able to round off your remarks with a rousing applause, which we would have heard from everyone had we been able to. I think if there is anyone on this call who has not been moved to action by your remarks here, Ambassador, they would be moved to action by nothing whatsoever. So I encourage absolutely everyone to become involved in all of the things that we can do to prevent annexation at this stage. So after your speech, I'm just going to make a couple of remarks in wrapping up this conference, and then I will call our final speaker, Jeremy Corbyn, and after Jeremy's remarks, the call will close. So let me just say, as chair, I just thank everyone else. I thank everybody for participating, but I will thank you a lot more if you leave this call and you make sure that you actually do something as a result of the remarks from His Excellency the Ambassador. We know that there is a massive amount of work to do, and we know that it's critical that we stand with the Palestinians and we amplify their voices and their calls. And that's really the job that we have to do in the next few days. So as part of this, please make sure you sign the recent Labour and Palestine statement and take part in the Day of Action, which was described to you by Hugh in his presentation. On July the 4th, next Saturday, there will be various activities, all socially distanced activities from lots of Palestine solidarity groups and other groups around the country. And please make sure that if you are a Labour Party member, that you submit any remarks on this to the website, which has been coming up in the chat. This could not be more important and more timely, this meeting. So spend the rest of your afternoon planning what it is that you're going to do to contribute to this critical cause at this critical time. And finally, just before I go, there's an awful lot going on Arise. So I just want to let you know that on Monday evening, after you've had time to make your submission on the international page, there will be another meeting. It's no turning back, your rights, your unions, and resisting the Tory agenda. And that will be addressed by Laura Pidcock, by my comrade in the House of Lords, Lord John Hendy QC, and Sarah Woolley from the Bakers Union. So once you've done everything that you need to do about Palestine on Monday, make sure that you perhaps come and join that call. So let me, with no further ado, as our final speaker, call Jeremy to talk to us, who I'm sure will lead us in a further call to action to make sure that we are saying strongly and with one voice, free Palestine. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Christine, thank you very much. Thank you for the excellent way you chair this and the great job you do for all good causes in the House of Lords and that you did before that in the NUT, because your contribution is amazing and your energy is immense. Thank you, Christine, for everything that you do. It's a real pleasure to be on this call today, and I'm very impressed that we've got 750 people at it. Imagine a public meeting of 750 on a Saturday afternoon somewhere would be a big event. And so just think of the crowd of people that have managed to join this Zoom call. And I do hope that after the corona crisis is over, we do make sure that we have our meetings in such a way that those that cannot attend them can still join in some form by Zoom or whatever else. We need to keep that very high level of participation. It's an honor to be able to speak alongside Hussam Zomlot, who is a very old friend of mine. We go back a very long way. And what he said was so clear, so decisive, so incisive, and so effective. But I also want to just say to him that the letter he sent me in April is one of my most treasured possessions. It was a very warm, very wonderful letter he sent to me. As far as I'm concerned, I want us as a party to maintain our position of full recognition of the state of Palestine and solidarity with the Palestinian people to bring about a long-term peace for all the peoples of that region. And the whole point of the Arise Festival and all the events on it is to inform as well as to mobilize people, inform and mobilize, because we're better mobilized when we're better informed. And I think this afternoon's event is a very good example of that. The corona crisis affects the whole world in different ways. What is exposed is places that don't have a health service are seriously at risk. Poor people that don't have access to a health service and are poorly nourished and have insecure housing are more likely to die as a result of it. And the corona crisis in refugee camps is a very, very serious thing altogether. And I'll come on to the question of Palestinian refugees in a moment or two. So when the coronavirus crisis passes its greatest intensity, let's see this as a turning point moment when we can start to develop that sense of global solidarity all around the world, to have an economy that works by investment, not by austerity, and that the super powerful global corporations are reined in, and that we have a determination to improve the living standards and the environment for everybody on the planet, particularly for the poorest people. I have been to Israel and Palestine on, I think, 9 occasions. I've visited very many places and I've spoken to very many people on all of those visits. And I've seen the effect of the settlements, and I've seen the way in which the checkpoint system works at the moment all over the West Bank. I've got vivid memories once of Laura and I trying to travel from Jericho to Jerusalem. If you look at it on the map, it's not very far. It's a short drive. It took us 6 hours. because we spent our whole time waiting at checkpoints where some incredibly rude people delayed us on our journey. For us, it was irritating, it was annoying, but we reached our destination in the end with a lot of very nice Palestinian people being very kind to us on the way. But I tried to put myself in the position of being a Palestinian building worker, trying to get to work and being delayed and delayed by checkpoints, maybe refused entry altogether, thus losing a day's wages or possibly the job altogether. Or put myself in the position of somebody who was seriously ill and trying to get to a hospital for medical support and couldn't get through. And so it's that day to day that will get worse and worse if the Trump plan goes ahead. And I'll come on to that in a moment. I was very pleased as leader of the party to be able to encourage a determination on Palestine, that we would stand up for the rights of Palestinian people, that we would recognize the state of Israel, as at the same time we recognize, as we obviously do, the state of Palestine, state of Israel and Palestine alongside each other. But I'm concerned that our decision conference in 2018, which was to me historic, has to maintain, it has to be party policy in the future. And I hope that everyone on this call will make their views and representations known when they put their submission into the National Policy Forum. As Adrian so effectively pointed out, we have to make our voices heard now very, very quickly and very, very loudly. But I'm also concerned that the NPF should not be the final arbiter of party policy. We have a party structure which is of affiliated organizations, trade unions for the main, and some socialist organizations. We also have obviously the constituency party where more than 500,000 members are able to express their views. The party conference should be the determiner of policy in the long run, not just the National Policy Forum. But the consultation is going on, and I urge people to get involved in that very, very quickly indeed. Now, as Hussam has pointed out, over a very long period of time, the two-state policy evolved. It was pressure from the international community on the PLO and on Israel that brought that policy about. It has not been implemented in the sense that the whole world has not joined in recognition of Palestine, but the UN has, and Palestine obviously has a very important voice at the UN. But at the same time, the settlement policy has continued. More and more of the West Bank is taken up with settlements. More and more settler roads are built. The wall has been constructed, dividing farmland, dividing communities, dividing villages. And Gaza has been placed effectively under siege. And so that the economy of Gaza relies entirely on UNRWA, on aid that gets through, and the difficulty of people traveling from Gaza to anywhere else is massive. And so there has to be a change. Now, Trump has come up with the Trump plan. But I just want, before I go on to that, just to say this. Hussam talked about the Palestinians living in Gaza and the West Bank, and he's quite right to do so. He also alluded to the very large number of Palestinians living in refugee camps all over the region, and indeed the diaspora all over the world. I visited the camps at Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon with the late Sir Gerald Kaufman. And we sat down and talked to many people who were resident in those camps about their life and their life experience, and the eternal hope they had that one day they'd be able to return home to their villages. And a couple of years ago, I went to the refugee camps in Jordan. They've been there a very long time, the same length of time as the camps have in Lebanon. And I met a group of students in a secondary school in one of the camps. They were wonderful. They were bubbly, they were enthusiastic, they were intelligent, they were incredibly well informed, and at the same time very sad, because their school was underfunded. UNRWA had just had its funding reduced yet again because the US under Trump had cut the funding for it. And at that time, they were frightened that their school itself might close altogether. And they were the lucky ones who'd got to secondary school and were trying to make the very best of their lives. And so the cut in UNRWA funding has an immediate effect on health services, on education, on the lives of ordinary Palestinian people. And so the Trump plan, supported by Netanyahu, is one for annexation of the West Bank, and the Palestinian enclaves, as they're going to be called, would be divided up, sort of little blots of islands all across the map, rather than a continuous Palestine area. And so it is being opposed very broadly by a lot of people all across the world. And I have joined in pretty much every letter of opposition to it and every delegation of opposition. And indeed, I was on a very long conference call a couple of weeks ago with speakers from the PLO, speakers from the human rights groups in Israel, and speakers from the diaspora, all of whom were pointing out just how dangerous this plan is. My worry is that there will be some reduced form of Trump plan put forward, and this will be then signaled as some kind of great victory. No, it has to be total opposition to the Trump plan, and it has to be the removal of the settlements and full recognition of the state of Palestine. And it has to be an end to the siege of Gaza, because if that doesn't happen, then what do we get? More poverty, more anger, more security operations, and a growth of yet more settlements all across the West Bank. And so our opposition has to be complete to this plan. It is due to start in possibly a few days' time. We're not absolutely sure of when it will begin, if it does begin. But our opposition has to be clear, and I will certainly be taking part in actions next Saturday to draw attention to it, and joining with other colleagues in Parliament through both the All-Party Palestine Group, but also through Palestine Solidarity and all the other organisations. The only future has to be one of peace and justice for the Palestinian people. That is impossible when your land is being taken, when the settlement policy goes on, an inability to travel, and impoverishment of the Palestinian people. And so we in the Labour Party have a very special responsibility on this, because we also have to understand the history of the region and the history of British involvement in it. The mandate that was given to Britain after the end of the First World War was one that was a precious entrustment, and that ended up with what we have at the present time. So I would urge all of our party members to understand the history of the whole region, to understand the British role in all of this, and understand that sense of anger that is there amongst so many Palestinian people, the way they've been treated, the way they have to live, and the way in which the international community seems too often deaf to the voices of Palestinian people wanting peace and wanting justice. And so today, I want our party to continue the policy that we agreed at the Liverpool conference in 2018. I want our party to be foursquare with all those who see the dangers of the Trump plan, and foursquare with people all around the world on this. So we come out of it with the Palestinian people being able to live in their own country in peace and in justice, and be able to grow the crops and trade the goods that they're denied doing at the present time. I've sat with young people in Gaza, on the West Bank, and I've asked them about their lives. their inability to travel, their inability to meet other people from around the world, and the way in which they vicariously view everything that happens on the whole planet through computer screens, because that's the only medium they have. That sense of imprisonment in Gaza, that sense of isolation, leads to deep, deep anger amongst those people. I was speaking once to a woman I know very well, Mona Farah, who was active in organizing the Gaza mental health campaign. And her view was that 70% of the people of Gaza were suffering from medical stress because of the situation in which they live. And so if we just do nothing, then the Trump plan will go ahead and there will be more bitterness, more hatred, more anger, and yet more poverty. If we succeed in defeating the Trump plan and ask the radical people in the United States who come out in such numbers to support Bernie Sanders and AOC and others to join with us in this campaign, that will affect the outcome of it, because it's pretty obvious that the politics of what goes on in Israel, what goes on in Palestine, but also what goes on in Europe and the United States is part of it as well. Thank you for inviting me to this call. It's been an absolute honor to share the platform with the wonderful people that we have on it. And thanks again to Hussam. And if you would take our solidarity and our greetings to the Palestinian people. And again, thank you very much for the kindness with which you treated me during my time as leader of the party, and the very valuable support, help and information that you were able to give us. Christine, thank you very much.
Okay, that's it, colleagues. The call is now at an end. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for listening, and free Palestine.